God takes over, and I'm blown away, and I realize that God can and will use people if they're willing to be, willing to let Him. Worship in itself, as we said, it comes from the heart. While there's a wrong way, there's not one right way to do it. But I definitely believe when I step aside and don't rely too much on my own ability, that just amazing things happen.
It's another week of Inside the Bible, the weekly podcast with spiritual insights on biblical truth. Welcome, my name's Andrew Winman. This episode's brought to you by the grace of God, the power that calls humanity out of darkness into the everlasting life found in Jesus Christ. We're back for another week with a study in the book of Genesis, chapter 44. If you've kept up with the series, you know that this is focused on two different life stories. The story of Joseph and the story of his brothers, for the most part. We took some time to study the life of Joseph, which really takes up the majority of the story. And when you think you've reached the climactic point of his journey, after being betrayed by his brothers, being sold in the land of Egypt, and eventually after being forgotten year after year after year, time after time after time, he finally gets to a point where he's recognized. And God elevates him to a level of authority, brings him through the storm, and gives him purpose. And just when you think that the story is about to come to an end, the story takes a shift to another direction. It reminds us that there were these brothers of Joseph who, in the first chapter that we've covered for this series, betrayed him essentially. They were the ones who started it all. The first chapter to reference Joseph, he was betrayed by his brothers, 10 of them to be exact, who decided to sell him into slavery, or I believe it may have been 11 to be exact, who decided to sell him into slavery because they were jealous of him. They were jealous of his tendency to boast and the favoritism that their father showed to him. And now we come back to them in a time of guilt where famine has hit the land. They have to take a trip to Egypt because they have to buy food if they're going to survive. But completely unaware that Joseph is the man they are purchasing the grain from, they find themselves in a kind of a pickle because Joseph is setting them up time after time to accuse them of crimes that they haven't committed, until kind of catching them in their own innocence to test them after he was betrayed. Why is he testing them? He wants to see their sincerity. He wants to see if his brothers are truly repentant before he reveals who he actually is. I don't know if you've ever been in a circumstance where you've been betrayed so much to the extent that you can't trust the person who betrayed you. You've heard them say they're sorry time and time again, and it's hard for you to come to a place of even conversing with them or considering the possibility of them fully repenting. But I hope this story today gives you hope in that area, because this is one chapter away from the climactic point of Joseph's life. After God elevated him, God was not through with him. God had yet to bring unity where division was caused. We read in the last chapter that his brothers, after they were sent home, completely afraid of Joseph, unaware that it was Joseph, had to go back to Egypt because their brother was in jail. They brought Benjamin with them by Joseph's command, and Joseph started to show favor to Benjamin. He welcomed everybody into his home. "Thank you for coming." And they said, "Oh, he's setting a trap for us. He's going to let us come inside his palace, and they plan to jump us and take us as slaves." Not so. He sat them down at the table, showed grace, was excited to see them. At one point, stepped away to even cry, because it was hard for him, after all those years of being separated, to finally see them again. But now Joseph has one more trick up his sleeve. Verse 1 in chapter 44, before he sends them away, it says, he commanded the steward of his house, saying, fill the men's sack with food, as much as they can carry. Then put every man's money in his sack mouth. The same trick as before. The same trick we saw back in 42, where they got home and they found that their money sacks were found inside the mouths of their sacks of grain or corn. Verse 2, and put my cup, the silver cup, in the sack mouth of the youngest, and his corn money also. And he did this according to the word that Joseph had spoken. As soon as the morning was light, the men were sent away, they and their donkeys. And when they were gone out of the city, not yet far off, Joseph said unto his steward, up, follow after the men, and when you overtake them, say unto them, what have you rewarded evil for good for? Or in other words, why have you rewarded evil for the good that we showed to you? Verse 5, is not this in which my Lord drinks, and whereby indeed he driveth? Ye have done evil in so doing. And he overtook them, and spake unto them these words. And they said unto them, for what reason does my Lord say these words? God forbid that thy servants should do according to this thing. In other words, why are you accusing us of taking your possession? Behold, the money which we found in our sacks' mouths we brought again to you out of the land of Canaan. How then should we steal out of the Lord's house silver or gold? With whomsoever thy servant be found, both let him die, and we also be my Lord's bondmen. And he said, now also let it be according unto your words. He with whom it is found shall be my servant, and ye shall be blameless. So in other words, he says, hey, if your accusation is true, if any of us have your king's cup inside our sacks, like you're accusing us of having, then let that person be put to death, and let us become your slaves. And the man says in return, you'll be blameless. Whoever doesn't have the cup in their sack will be blameless, but whoever has the cup in their sack will be the slaves. And they speedily took them, every man his sack, to the ground, and opened every man his sack. And he searched, and began from the oldest, and left to the youngest. And the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. And they ripped their clothes, and ladded every one of his donkeys, and returned to the city. And Judah and his brethren came to Joseph's house, for he was yet there, and they fell before him on the ground. And Joseph said unto them, what deed is this that you have done? Do you not know that such a man as I can certainly divine, or in other words, find these things out because of my divinity, or my divine position? And Judah said, what shall we say, my Lord? What shall we speak? Or how shall we clear ourselves? God has found out the iniquity of thy servant. Behold, we are the Lord's servants, both we and he also with whom the cup was found. Just listen to that first acknowledgement. Listen to the first thing that he acknowledges here. It's God who has found us out. We get caught in our actions. We get caught in our sins. Many of us do, and yet we don't always see it as God being the one who has revealed our sin to people. And yet these people who were completely innocent of the flaw in that Joseph set them up, openly admit it was God who caught us in the act, thinking that it was their sin. So often we get caught in the act of whatever iniquity we're committing. And the first thing we say is, you caught me, referring to the people who catch us in the act. But as David said, against you and only you, Lord, have I sinned. When our sins revealed, what a sign of humility it is when we acknowledge that it was God who ultimately sovereignly revealed who the sinner was, what the sinner was doing. Because it openly admits that God saw us in the act. And that's the first sign of humility here with Joseph's brothers. He says, God has found out our sins. He's found out the sins of your servants. Behold, we are the Lord's servants, both we and also he with whom the cup is found. And he said, God forbid that I should do so. But the man in whose hand the cup is found, he shall be my servant. And as for you, get up in peace unto your father. So where the brother Judah tried to make the attempt saying, we will be your servants for the punishment of this lad who the cup was found with. We'll be your servants. And Joseph says, I'm not going to have it that way. I'm not going to give you the opportunity to do so. Kind of testing the waters, testing the sincerity. Judah says, please let us be your servants. He says, God forbid that I should do so. Whoever the cup was found with, he shall be my servant. And as for you, you go in peace because I haven't found you at fault. Go and be with your father. But could you imagine the strain it puts on the brothers? Especially Judah, who feels the most responsible, who feels the need to make this thing right. How can we face our father knowing that he trusts us with Benjamin? We assured him greatly that we would bring his son back. It was Reuben who said, we'll bring the son back to you, or you can kill my 2 sons and put me through grief. Judah says, we'll bring him back as surely as I live. We'll bring him back, and I shall be surety for him. How can they face their father with such a promise that they made and that they have not kept? And so at this point, Judah is going to make a pretty sincere sounding apology for the mistake that was made and a plea to let them take Benjamin home, or at least to let Benjamin go free and to take them instead. Judah says, come near. He says, and Judah came near unto him and said, O my Lord, let my servant, I pray you, speak a word in my Lord's ears. And do not let your anger burn against your servant, for you are even as Pharaoh. Kind of using the butter up method, if you ask me. For you are even as Pharaoh. Speak positively when you want to give an apology. Don't speak negatively. Sometimes we might have a tendency to get a little bit of a defensive approach, take the defensive approach in our apologies, and wind up accusing the people we're apologizing to. No, Reuben takes a step and he says, you are even as great as the Pharaoh. I recognize your authority in this situation. So he acknowledges it. Now, in the next few verses, he gives an overview of the entire story. You asked if we had a father. You asked if we had a brother. We said yes. You said, you shall not come and see my face unless you bring the brother with us. And so he explains, we went to our father, and our father wasn't willing to send him. And we finally convinced our father to let him send Benjamin with us. And when we brought him, you promised that we would be okay. And I even made a promise to my father that if I don't bring back Benjamin, I will be surety for him if anything happens. He says, my father said that if you don't do this, if you don't bring him back, I'll be torn to pieces. Mischief will befall me. You will bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to the grave. Verse 30, now therefore when I come to thy servant my father, and the lad is not with us, seeing that his life is bound in the lad's life, it shall come to pass when he sees that the lad is not with us, that he will die. And your servant shall bring down the gray hairs of our father with sorrow to the grave. Please don't put us through this. Please don't put my father through this. But here's the turning point. For your servant, referring to Judah, became surety for the lad unto my father, saying, if I bring him not to you, then I shall bear the shame unto my father forever. Now therefore I pray to you, let my servant abide instead of the lad, a bondman to the Lord, and let the lad go up with his brothers. For how shall I go to my father, and the lad be not with me? Lest perhaps I see the evil that shall come on my father. Now that is one sincere apology, if I've ever heard one. Joseph's test is about to reach the conclusion. He tested his brothers. He set them up because he wanted to see this one demonstration given by at least one of his brothers. Years ago, you betrayed me. Years ago, you sold me into slavery. And I'm anxious. I want to reveal myself. But how will I know that you're not the same people that you were back then? Well, you have another younger brother. Let's see how you respond when he's close to being taken away from you. And if you show this sincerity of desperately trying to save him for your father's sake, I'll know that you have a repentant heart and a changed character. Do you think we saw that repentant heart in this chapter? We know that Judah is ironically connected to the same tribe that Christ came through. He came from the tribe of Judah. And interestingly enough, it's Judah here who's saying, please take me instead. Let me lay down my life on the line. I will be surety for him. I'll take the brunt of the blade for what my brother is apparently guilty of. Just as Christ willingly took the punishment for us. The ancestry leading all the way back to the father of the tribe of Judah. Judah himself willingly taking the punishment for his youngest brother, Benjamin. That's very profound. And what we're about to see in the following chapter is Joseph's response. That's what we'll come to in the following week. Does Joseph reach the conclusion that his brothers are sincere and fully repentant in heart? You can read ahead and find out. I'll cover it next week here on Inside the Bible. In the meantime, may the Lord bless and keep you in the way you should go this week. God bless.
Be narrow-minded in everything I may do. I got one thing